Howdy, Tonzillophiles, and welcome to another episode of Escaping the Cave, the Tonzilla X-Pod at escapingthecave.com. You can also hit me up at ETCPod over there on Twitter. I've got a Facebook page. I've also got a Facebook group. You're more than welcome to apply to join if you'd like to participate in the conversation. It's a very select group, a very small group. If you'd rather lurk, go ahead and do that as well. I actually talk about that group a little bit in this episode. This is going to be number 88 you're about to hear, recorded on September 20th of 2020. If you're looking for some St. Bader Ginsburg commentary and analysis, prepare to be disappointed. Not going to get it in this episode. This episode, like the last one, pretty much politics free. We talk about things affecting politics. If you're familiar with the show, you understand what I'm talking about social media, disinformation, this informational anarchy environment we live in, driven and perpetuated by social media and other things, but we focus on the social media end, and we continue that today, building on the momentum we had last week in discussing the new documentary, The Social Dilemma, that's come out. Andrew Sullivan plays a role in this one. He's got a new article he put out on Friday called We Are All Algorithms Now. Right down the same line. It's an excellent piece. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend you head over to his Substack website and check it out. A few of the other things that we talk about today include John Steinbeck. He came up again. His book Travels with Charlie, talking about what it's like to have a reunion at middle age, late in life, whatever, reuniting with people that maybe you haven't seen in decades. This ties into social media, how we are reconnected with people who we were friends with decades ago, and how unnatural that is. Also talk about Brian, his social media detox, and also talk about gatekeepers, where they've gone, and sad to say, how essential they have proven to be, how this idea that democratized information and democratized opinion was going to bring forth this democratic utopia. We talk about that and what the media's job is. Also, the economics of the media and who's to blame here. If you've listened to this show long enough, you know the answer to that, at least in my opinion. We go the other way with this. We talk about the usefulness and the utility of these platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and the rest, as tools rather than simply crutching on them as dopamine delivery devices. Start stabbing at solutions. What individuals we can do to sort of become organic human beings once again. It's a pretty good show. Let's get to it. Thanks for clicking in. If I could figure out whether or not a podcast can fall in the forest, and if Twitter isn't there to hear it, will it exist? I would. Well,
you're right. You've got to, you're doing this work of you've got to get the word out about it, and that's one of the ways to do that if you're using it for a commercial means. But if you're one of the masses that is just using it to be the crazy guy in the middle of town shouting at everybody, then it's just not useful.
It's quite the opposite. Yeah, it's corrosive.
I think the difference is, you're not looking, well, maybe you're looking for a little bit of validation from it when you put something out, but you're using it as a means to promote your podcast. You're not using it as a means for self-validation.
I don't want Twitter validation at all. I like it when people click the little heart button and they click the little share button because it's moving. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The product is moving further afield. I don't want comments on Twitter, because it leads to other people commenting. And invariably on Twitter, then it turns into that cage match. And people just going back. You're not discussing anything that's in the podcast. You're not discussing anything at all. You're just sitting there yelling at each other, trying to be provocative.
You can be the loudest.
Yeah, trying to get people to follow. Exactly. And Twitter's just, even the people that follow you, the people that share your stuff, that like your stuff, it's all a game. They're trying to get you to click on their profile and follow them. It's all a manipulative game of bullshit. Like, I'll follow you if you follow me. You know what I mean? I'll check out your stuff.
I wonder if that spills out into real life. You know what I mean? Leave social media out of it. I mean, do you become somebody's friend because they can do something for you? And I don't know if that sort of social media mentality spills out into your actual personal relationships.
Sure. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like networking. in the professional field. You know, you may hate somebody. We have several examples I'm sure we could share from our career. People that you didn't really like all that much, and people you wouldn't have anything to do with in a normal setting, but you're professionally connected, so you don't quote unquote burn the bridge. They may be able to help you later on in life or later on in your career. So I think there's probably an element to that.
Yeah, and the idea of unfriending and unliking and all that kind of stuff is, I think it just spills out into your real physical world.
Yeah, it might.
You said something I don't approve of, therefore you're no longer my friend.
Yeah, I've done that.
And in real life, not just online, you know?
Yeah.
And that's a sad thing. It's terribly sad to me.
But there's also elements of that too, that maybe it creates some sense of, I don't know, introspection about who your friends are and why they're your friends. You know, if you examine that, I mean, are you willing to unfriend someone because they have a political view or said something politically you don't like? And I've had this happen to me. And I'd be like, okay, I'm done with this person. And then I have to sit here and think, well, you know, we used to get along and we used to have fun before politics and all this. And in the last 15 years, though, I've noticed that most of these people wouldn't be in my life without Facebook, without this electronic intermediary anyway. And so by defriending them, I have returned them to the previous pre-social media status of none. You know what I mean? We weren't in touch then. We didn't maintain any organic contact without this ease of electronics doing it for us.
Yeah. Like the old high school friends that friend you and you never talk to. Right?
Exactly. But I noticed that
we weren't friends then. Why are we friends now?
Yeah, we sure as fuck didn't talk about politics. Right? And I've noticed that most of the people, the vast majority of the people that I had done that to, had no real utility in my organic life. It was all this electronic facade through social media. Yeah, we weren't in touch before this.
That's a good point. Now, but there have been some good things too, right? I mean, there have been families reunited and lost friends and lost family members. I've done it too, you know?
Yeah. Both of us have, haven't we?
Yes. So when you're using, I guess when you're using these things as tools to connect, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But when you're using it as a sole means of getting your information about the world, that's where the problem is, right?
Right, and your socialization and your status and your validation as well. You know,
validation, I think, is important too. If your validation is coming from social media, then you need help.
Yeah,
you need help getting validated by real people.
Then a lot of people need help.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely, we've grown so far apart as a country because we stand in the middle of town yelling at each other on Twitter, and these might be jumping topics, but now it's to the point where we're afraid to say because of the organic censorship that's going on. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Afraid to say.
You're afraid to speak your mind because of the organic censorship, right?
Sure.
Cancel culture, I guess they're calling it now, right? So you've said something that I don't agree with, so you need to be destroyed.
Right. Well, it goes beyond something I agree with. You said something that goes against my orthodoxy or the established or accepted orthodoxy that I approve of.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not me as so much as we. You've gone against the groupthink. Yeah,
and that groupthink is so ingrained, possibly because of the tribalism that we're going through right now. I don't know. It's like ancient tribalism at this point.
Yeah.
That if you disagree with me, you're the other. You're in the other tribe, and therefore you are a danger to me.
The Auslander.
Yeah, right.
It's like being a socialist in Nazi Germany. It's like it's almost like, I don't want to say I hate using Nazi Germany. I know that's cliche, but it's always the thing that comes to mind. Like you're being cast into the out group.
Maybe this might be minimalizing things, but possibly, going on a social media fast or a diet or a complete ban of social media in your life will probably go a long way to helping you become, not you personally, but people become more rounded human beings, right?
Absolutely.
Get your friends the old-fashioned way. Go through your life with 3 or 4 people that you call friends, 1 or 2 that you would call good friends or best friends,
mm-hmm.
and you're more lucky than most people in the world if you have that, right?
Oh yeah.
And get your validation from them. Have friends who are willing to tell you that you're stupid sometimes, and that your opinion is fucked up at sometimes. Those kind of friends, and let them do that without having to cancel them or destroy them or annihilate them or, own them.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So this is the world we live in now, which is, it's just not, it's not authentic. It's inauthentic, I guess.
Terribly.
Is the word I'm looking for.
It really is. It's like the Matrix analogy. I know you like the Borg idea. I
really
love
the Borg and the Matrix.
Yeah, I love the Matrix idea because everything that we see coming through this portal is a digital manifestation that someone else has created. You're not seeing the world through your computer screen. You are seeing someone else's constructed interpretation that they want you to see. The only way to see the world for yourself is with your eyeballs.
That's right. You are an algorithm, to quote Andrew Sullivan, right?
Yeah, that was such a fantastic article. If you guys listeners haven't seen that yet, he's got another article that came out on Friday, which would have been the 18th of September, and it basically falls right into the wheelhouse of what we were talking about with the social dilemma last week. In fact, he talks about that. But he talks about this siloed tribal fever that we've fallen into. What a great line, huh? We've fallen into as a country, and that's exactly what you were just talking about.
That's exactly what we're talking about. He just does it so much better because he's a pro writer. He's a wordsmith.
He's astounding. And he's got such a great background. He's someone that is worth listening to on this particular topic in particular. Nice job, wordsmith.
Particularly.
Yeah, I caught it that time at least. But he went through this thing. I talked about it last week in 2016 where he was involved in his blog. He was one of the first big bloggers 20 years ago or whatever it was. And he was spending so much time on the internet. He was getting involved in these debates and these arguments and just in the cobweb of cyberspace before we knew what it was. And it took a huge toll on him that he got to the point that he had to give it up. He had to get rid of the blog. This thing that was making him a lot of money, making him famous because of what it was doing to him. And he found it incredibly difficult to do, to detach from the digital matrix. And he had to go to this, like this meditation retreat and do all this other stuff. I mentioned all that because he wrote about that. And it's an incredibly self-searching, probing, almost like a confession kind of thing that he wrote 4 years ago. And it's one of the most powerful things that I have ever read, and it's the one thing that really got me to push forward with the digital detox concept that I was sort of constructing at that time.
Right.
So now he understands this. He does. He has been through it. He's experienced it, and he was ahead of the curve on it. And so to hear him talk and read what he has to say about what's happening to us collectively, he knows from whence he speaks.
Yeah, he's been there. He's been through it.
Yeah.
He's seen the bottom.
And he's terrified, almost as terrified as me.
Well, rightfully so. It's terrifying. I go back to human interaction. We got to have real, genuine human interaction. This idea that, I guess for me, I was never the type that got much validation from social media. I used it as a way to keep in touch with family and, sometimes some old friends and things for a little while, but those usually fall by the wayside organically as they should, right?
Mm-hmm.
But once I got to the point where, you have a few hundred friends in your friends list, but there's only like 3 that you're still following because you've unfollowed literally everyone in your friends list, right? Not because of anything they said. It's just because you have nothing in common. There's a reason that you lost touch with each other to begin with.
This is so awesome. I
let these things happen organically, and you know what I'm saying? Does this make sense? Am I making sense? I hope so.
Let me tell you how much sense you're making, Brian. We haven't been in contact for, constantly over the years. There's been lapses here and there. I came up with this thing from John Steinbeck. You're familiar with John Steinbeck, right?
Of course.
Hey, he's got this fantastic little book. A lot of people don't know about it, but it's called Travels with Charlie. And he and his dog take a trip around the country. He's getting old. He's an established, famous writer. He wants to take one last trip around the country in his sort of outfitted pickup truck, right? Do a road trip around America and see what it is. He did this in the early 60s, toward the end of his life. And he stopped by his old hometown of Salinas, California, and decided he was going to reconnect with his family, his old friends and his old stomping grounds and everything. And he was terribly disappointed in what happened.
Yeah.
He was writing about everything you just talked about, and I've written about this. I have a podcast on it, actually, one of the early ones. I'll send you a link to it. I think you're going to love it based on what you just said. And
I probably will.
The crux of it is that He was now an old man. All of his memories of his friends were static. Okay, they're from 40, 50 years ago at this point. Life happened in between. There's a gap between his memory, the life lived, and the person sitting in front of you, and there's no way that those things can line up the way that you think that you want them to.
They can't possibly. I mean, and it's a lived experience. You know, I connect with old friends from when I was in the Navy, and you know, we have a terrific, you know, important shared experience from that time.
Yeah,
and it was a valuable and cherished time. But now, you know, people have moved on. It's been 30 years, and now we have other than those few years, we have literally nothing in common.
Exactly.
So let's just move on. You know what I mean? Let me keep a fond memory of you.
Yes.
And let's move on.
Let's not destroy the old Polaroid. That's how I look at it.
That's a terrific visual. Yeah.
You've got this wonderful picture in your scrapbook of somebody that meant a lot to you once upon a time. Don't let the new person come in and rip it to shreds.
And to be a disappointment.
Yes. It's so remarkable. And I've had such a problem with this because I left home 26 years ago now and moved around the country, was out of Michigan for a good portion of time. And I didn't get back to see a lot of these people. I've gone back a few times and I've tried to reconnect with these people. And I find that they don't allow that I've evolved.
Exactly.
They still see me as 26 years old. I still see them as 26 years old.
That's all in the rearview mirror.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And sometimes when you sit down with folks like that, and it's nice to see them, you know, nothing wrong with that.
Sure.
You sit down, let's get lunch, and you get lunch, and all you talk about is that time. And anything that's gone on, but from then until now is not a shared experience.
Yeah.
Nice to hear about. It's good to know that you're doing well. But the reality is when you friend these folks and you become friends on social media, your relationship is conducted through a series of likes and shares. And that's just not a relationship.
And Steinbeck, really, I highly recommend that book to anybody, really. I mean, it's a fantastic book. It's a little short thing. It's not like a novel or anything like that. But his analogy was that his initial thought was that he thought those people were ghosts, had become ghosts. Right. But when he thought about it and reflected upon it a little bit more, he realized that he was the ghost. Like they had stayed static. They had stayed where they had grown up. They had lives. They kept their relationships and their friendships together. The passage of time happened. He was the phantasm that left.
Yep. That's right. And that's been my life too. I've always been the one to move on. You know, I left home from Ohio a long time ago. Still keep in touch with my family, of course, and drive down there and see them occasionally and that sort of thing. But we really don't have much in common other than the times that we grew up. And it's nice to know that everybody's doing well, but I don't need to see you every single day of my life. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But yeah, I'm sure. It's called Travels with Charlie?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, he's, Of Mice and Men and Grapes of Wrath. And you know what I mean? We're talking about some of the greatest novels in American history are John Steinbeck.
He's an icon, man. Yeah. And he wrote it late in life. He's at the height of his verbal powers, I guess. It's so good. So good. And so well written. That book had a huge effect on me. Just that one little section of it about him returning home, because it was something that I was struggling with as well. Like I couldn't reconcile. When I went back to my hometown, I couldn't stay sober. Literally, I could not stay sober. I felt like I was having some sort of an anxiety-driven break. I've written about all this. I've talked about it before. This isn't new to most of my listeners and people who have consumed the stuff that I've written over the years. But I couldn't understand it. What it boiled down to was that there was this dissonance between the person that I was, the person that I wanted to sort of leave behind from 25 years ago, who needed to be put off in the corner or he'd be dead from drinking by now, and the person that I've sort of evolved into over the last quarter century. And I couldn't reconcile those things, and I couldn't be there without reverting back to that mindset because these people couldn't relate to the new one because they hadn't seen the passage of time.
So you had to de-evolve in order to fit in.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that drove me nuts.
It drives you nuts because of all the pressure that you get from society that this is the way it's supposed to be, right?
Exactly.
This is what a family's supposed to look like. This is what a friendship is supposed to look like. And when you come back, this is what it should be, and it should always be a Hallmark card. And when it's not, you feel like there's something wrong with you. When the reality is, it's the situation that was fucked up to begin with. So you should have never put yourself in that situation, or else gone in with a different mindset, right?
That's exactly right. He phrased it and he put it so well. I think the line he used in the book was, "You can't go home again. Once you leave, you're gone."
Yeah, well, that's why he's John Steinbeck.
Yeah, that's an old. I guess that's an old cliche. You can't go home again. We've all heard that before, but it really, it makes a lot of sense. And I've experienced this traveling too, where I've had this wonderful, like Cambria, whatever it is, California. It's right near Morrow Bay on the Pacific Ocean. One of the first places that I stopped in 2008 on my very first hitchhiking trip, I had such a phenomenal, just eye-opening existential experience at this little campground there, right? And it was just this perfect image. And I decided a year and a half later I was going to go back there. And it sucked. Why did I like this place so much? Why blah, 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 blah. And there's this old analogy that I read that you can go back to, the banks of a river. The water's not the same. The course of events that got you to that place and everything that was going on around you in your life at that particular point in time is what made that point, that place, that spot special. And once you go back, that's where the Polaroid analogy came from. I had this wonderful idea what this place was in 2008, and I tarnished it by trying to go back to it in 2010 and recreate it.
That's it. And, for whatever reason, we start to think of our childhoods and hometowns or whatever, and if we're not still living there nostalgically. And, we're only thinking about the positive, all the good times. And then we get really good vibes about it. And then we go back and visit, and then you're like, what a shithole. Yeah. That was my experience with my hometown.
Yeah. I never really got that. I ran far, far, far away. What's that song?
Never look back.
Flock of seagulls.
Flock of seagulls, yeah.
And so I never really, I avoided it. And I went back and I started having some decent sort of experiences with a lot of my friends. It was nice. The nostalgia was there. It was nice to reconnect. Mm-hmm. I wasn't 65. I was about 38 or 39 when I went back. Yeah. So there was a little youth left. And so I was able to touch on it a little bit, but I got lured in. You know what I mean?
My experience with doing that, I do know what you mean. And my experience with that is it's nice in the moment because it validates your history.
Yeah.
Right. The narrative that you have in your mind of your history, you get around the people that were part of that, it validates it. It was like, yeah, that was a part of it. It wasn't, a dream or a nightmare. It was real, right. And it was there, and we shared that experience, and it was good. But maybe the wisdom you take out of that is maybe it's also good that we leave it in the past and we have this moment of experience and then let that go. But I know how that experience feels when you're in it, when you get together with old friends you haven't seen for 20 years, and it really validates that period of your life. And that's healthy too.
Yeah.
But you also have to be able to kind of set that aside and say, that was a wonderful part of my life. I don't want to change a thing, but I'm living now. This is my part of my life now.
And that, I think that's what happened. I think once the glow of reminiscing and reflecting and sort of rekindling that youthful fake vibe, once that wore off, then you're left like, okay, how do you fit now? Guy I played softball with 20 years ago, the guy I used to go hunt questionable beaver at the bar with 20 years ago. How do you fit into this life now? And more often than not, with the passage of 25 years, and I'm a different species than I was 25 years ago, thank God.
Oh, hell yeah.
So how do I bring you into this? Or do I bring you into this? And this is the problem, bringing it back to social media. One of the problems that social media has created is that there is none of that, as you pointed out earlier, that natural attrition of relationships.
Right.
Where we are now expected, somehow, starting in 2008, when we had this massive electronic reunion, to put everyone from every phase of our lives into our electronic friends list, our little suitcase, and take them from epic to epic to epic to epic along with us. There's no leaving anything off to the side of the road.
That's right.
And these friendships...
It's constant.
Yeah, and these friendships, it's natural. It's been happening since the beginning of time that people would, the relationships flourish, they blossom, they begin to fade, and before long, they fall off to the side. It's just natural. It doesn't mean anything. It's not an indictment of the person.
Some of the ones where you have a couple people who are particularly compatible, they last.
Yes.
Sometimes they last a lifetime.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's how things are supposed to work, right? You and I have been friends for 20 years. We kind of had a period of time where we had a break and we kind of did our own thing for a while.
Yeah.
But just a natural order of things kind of brought us back together, and now we haven't lost a beat.
We put forth the effort to maintain the friendship because it was important.
Yeah.
The people that we didn't, or that didn't maintain the relationships with us, that didn't happen, and that's okay.
That's right. That's exactly right, and that's fine.
Yeah. That's what social media has destroyed. It's taken all of these bodies buried in the friendship boneyard for 25 years, reanimated them, and here come these zombies staggering back at you talking about politics.
Zombies, that's right. I mean, and could you imagine just psychologically trying to manage 300 actual friends?
No one can do that.
And their birthdays and all of their cards, and we got to go visit this and we got to do that. And no, you can't do it. Most people go through their life, and this is a fact, with one or two people that they can really call friends, and maybe 5 or 6 good acquaintances, and the rest are they're just people they know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's it.
Right. But isn't it weird, though, that in the last 15 years with social media, that if you try to keep people and put those boundaries up, these friendship boundaries, these familiarity boundaries, like, okay, you know what? I like you, but you're not one of my close friends. You really don't have the status in my life to speak to me in that way.
Yes, status. That's good. That's good.
I don't think that's not going to continue. You need to kind of go away. And when you do that, when you put those boundaries up and you put those guardrails around these relationships, these virtual zombies that have come back from the past, and you start to prioritize properly.
You start ranking them.
Holy crap, you get this blowback.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you're too good for me. It has nothing to do with being too good for you.
I don't know you. I don't know who you are.
What the hell are you?
Right, exactly. I don't know. I've been without Facebook now for a little over a week, and I'm feeling pretty good about it. I did go through before we, while we were just chit-chatting before we came on here, I did go through a few days of some actual sort of withdrawal, some sort of, I don't know, maybe it was a dopamine withdrawal or something, but so I found alternatives, right? I found things like, news feeds, real news feeds, not garbage news feeds. And so those kinds of things I look at, and I told you last week I subscribed to an actual newspaper. I read the newspaper, Todd. I actually read a fucking newspaper. And I find out that there's information in there.
You're a Luddite.
and it's pretty good.
Yeah. How do you maintain the attention to read a 2,000-word article?
And some of the things on the editorial page I don't agree with, and that's okay. Right?
Yeah, that's actually good. Some people would say that's a beneficial thing. It gives you something else to think about, another perspective to perhaps consider.
A different perspective. What?
Blasphemy! Yeah. It's.
I didn't agree with the editorial, and I wasn't able to unfriend him. How do I live?
Like, you can cancel the subscription, Brian.
I couldn't annihilate him. I couldn't. What are some of the ones that you see on the clickbait? I couldn't own him. I couldn't. Yeah.
That's the funny thing, because you could try. You still could try. You could send a letter to the editor.
Oh,
that's how we
write a strongly worded letter.
That's how we used to do it, right?
Yeah. Put on my letter to the editor sweater. And I'm going to write a strongly worded letter.
Yeah, but the thing was back then that nobody would see it. Just the editor, unless the editor chose to.
And the editor got to choose if he wanted to publish it, right?
And so therefore you had to be reasonable in your strongly worded dissent in order to
make an argument.
Yeah, one that the editor would see worthy of printing in the paper. Whereas now you just log on to Twitter and rant. And everybody, and everybody sees it.
Some people would come back on that argument and say, well, who the fuck is the editor to decide what I get to put out there?
He's the editor of the newspaper.
You need those gatekeepers. You have to have those gatekeepers.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
I imagine there are some unscrupulous ones out there, but for the most part, a person becomes an editor of a newspaper or a news organization because they have some sort of ability to be an information gatekeeper that's fair and honest.
Right. That goes back to this whole thing that I think I talked about a couple episodes back, where like 20 years ago, at the beginning of the internet, there was this utopian sort of vision of how taking the gatekeepers away was going to democratize both information and opinion, so you weren't getting one viewpoint. Where
I remember reading that bullshit.
Yeah, it was going to be this Democrat. It's the only word for it. Utopia. This dawning new age of democratic, thriving democracy. And it's turned out to be exactly the opposite. Democratizing information is a terrible idea. It's worse than direct democracy because there become no facts. We've seen it happen. We're seeing it happen right now. There have to be.
I don't want to get my news from the kid who lives 2 doors down. You know what I mean?
No.
He's not a reporter. He's not a journalist. He didn't put in any effort or have any expense in being trained in the ethics and process, and rules of being a journalist. You just make a blog and call yourself a reporter. You're a fucking idiot.
The only skill you need to be an reporter is to know how to be provocative, how to get attention. You don't need any sort of journalistic training, any kind of ethical training, nothing. All you need to do is get attention.
Be rude and you can get attention.
Gatekeepers are essential. I didn't used to believe this. This is something maybe, 15, 20 years ago, you and I may have had different views on this. Not anymore. There have got to be people who are trained, people who hopefully have the ethical fortitude to try to see things as they are and present them as they are. Without that, 25 years ago, you didn't have anything. Now with this technology, it's going nuclear.
Well, they have to go through the cost and the discipline of getting the knowledge. I think, the first thing that comes to mind, I'm going back to Jurassic Park when Jeff Goldblum is telling, what's his name? The old guy. God, I'm brain farting on this. What's his name? Anyway,
seen that movie.
He said, seriously, the original one?
Never seen.
So anyway, he's telling him, but you didn't go through any discipline to get the knowledge. You learned how to clone dinosaurs, but you didn't go, you bought it. You bought the knowledge. You bought scientists. You didn't go through, so there's no ethics behind what you're doing. There's no morals. There's no ethics behind what you're doing. And therefore, that's a problem, right? Because you don't know the extent of harm that you're doing if you're doing it wrong. And frankly, almost everyone is doing it wrong right now.
No ethic behind it. So you're just doing it to do it without putting any thought into it.
You didn't earn it. So therefore, you have no reason to protect it.
Yeah.
Does that fit? I mean, do you think that makes sense?
I think it makes perfect sense. And, there has to be, I think, some attachment to, what's the word I'm looking for here? I'm struggling to find maybe I need more tea.
More tea.
An attachment to the necessity behind what you're doing. To understand that your job as an editor or a reporter or a journalist, an investigator, however you want to term it, in a democracy is not to make money. It's not to make yourself famous. It's not to get attention. It is to provide a vehicle or an avenue to an enlightened citizenry who can then make rational, sensible choices about their own democracy.
Yeah, and this whole notion that the media needs to be friendly to politicians and to the government, this is antithetical to everything I believe about media. Media's job is to hold government accountable.
It's to be antagonistic. To be
antagonistic to government and to hold the government accountable to the people, shine a light on what's going on, good and bad, and now it's become this thing where you have to be friends with the government in order to get a seat in the White House, to be able to get a seat in the newsroom. Whose ass you have to kiss to be a reporter on the White House lawn or wherever, right?
Yeah.
And what are you selling in your soul in order to get that?
I would actually I think that in 2020. Yeah, I think you have to change that model a little bit. I don't think the job of the press is solely to be the antagonist toward government. I think that the job today, I think it's evolved to the point where I'm going to use the word "should." I hate this word, but where the media should be antagonistic to the ideological competitors trying to take hold of the reins of government. Both of them.
Yeah.
Where you're not just focusing on Congress, you're not just focusing on the White House, the executive, judicial branch, all of this other stuff. You're focusing on what's coming out of each of the mutually exclusive political cults. Their propaganda, their rhetoric. That's what's dominating the news cycles and the informational ecosystem now. It's not so much Trump, although he's very skilled at what he does on Twitter and everything else. But the rest of the stuff is coming from these ideological springs, right? And that's what's being used, I think, as fodder going back and forth between these camps. So why is, instead of the media taking one side or the other, they should be turning their lenses around on both of them?
There are respectable news organizations out there, but most of them are in print, and people aren't subscribing to newspapers anymore. Most newspapers are going under, or they're being gobbled up by giant corporations.
They can't compete.
Right.
They just can't compete.
No, but that's where the good information is. You know, the legitimate information, and the legitimate journalists are. Well, I'm not saying there aren't legitimate journalists in newspaper and radio and television. We got a great news radio station over here on this side of the state, and they do a fabulous job. But you know, they're getting a lot of their stories from the print media here in town. You know what I mean? That's where it starts. Yeah. And so you lose that integrity that you get from, you know, the old reporter, you know, at the news, but a haggard reporter sitting at a typewriter. Yeah. You lose that.
Right.
You know, you lose that.
Well, who has the attention span to sit and read a Washington Post article about Watergate now? Who's going to sit through 5,000 words of this? But who will? And this is the problem, because it is, I am all about talking about reforming the media and how the media should be holding power accountable, not just the president, not just Congress, but power in general and those who would be in power. But the problem comes back to, and this is something I've been harping on since I resurrected this podcast a year and a half ago, is that it's also the reality of the situation is that it is a capitalist society in which we live. Right or wrong, the media is a profit-based medium. It's a corporate media. It has to make money. I'm 100% with you. Ed Murrow saw this in 1959. He knew exactly where this was headed. That's another conversation. The reality of the situation is it is. And so you have to put some of the onus on us because we demand this chum. We don't want to read 5,000-word articles. We do not want to understand anything. We just want the bullet points. We want the provocative headline. And so they have to give it to us.
Do you think that starts in the education system where we're not teaching civics anymore? We're not teaching government class. We're not teaching high school students how to be citizens anymore. At least in most schools. I mean, some probably are. I don't know about you when you went through high school, but I spent I think my junior and my senior years taking full year-long courses that had to do with some form of government, right? Whether it was general civics or whether it was federal government or something like that, and sociology, right? Yeah. So I've heard, and I don't have kids or kids in school, but as I understand it, they're just not teaching that stuff anymore.
Yeah, I don't know.
Which devalues it, right? Makes it like, well, if I'm not, so there's no one even attempting to understand.
Now, this goes back, I think, to your Jurassic Park analogy. The technology has, I'm thinking about Neil Postman. I'm thinking about Marshall McLuhan right now. Marshall McLuhan, for the listeners, guy that founded the field of study called media ecology back in the 1960s. He was sort of the one guy who started sounding the alarm about data overload, about this torrent of media that was being unleashed by technology, this torrent of information, and how it's going to change the discourse and how people converse and how they interact. Neil Postman followed that up in the 1980s with Amusing Ourselves to Death and then Technopoly. And what I'm thinking about when you ask what it's from and where I see it stemming from, I think it ties into that Jurassic Park thing you were talking about, where we didn't consider the ethics of the technology and how the technology was going to affect us. And I'm not talking about just the internet. I'm talking back into the 70s and 80s when the news channels and the cable news channels started popping up, and then we had the internet and everything else. Yeah. When you talk about what's responsible for people, not who's responsible or why we're not interested in 5,000-word exposés on a topic, it's because I think that the technology has changed how we consume information, and we did not consider how the technology would feed that and what the effects of that would be.
right? We don't earn it, right? So we just sit and just absorb it. Even sitting down and reading a newspaper is an action, right? You've got you're earning that information because you're stopping and you're directing your attention to those words on the page and letting them get into your brain rather than just staring mindlessly at a television news network while you're sort of trying to learn everything through osmosis, which you're not, because you're probably not, while you're watching the news, you're probably also on your phone. And right. And so none of it is getting in.
Right.
And so that's the point. And that's what I'm going back. That's why it just reminded me of the Jeff Goldblum scene in Jurassic Park, where we didn't earn the knowledge. So we have no obligation to protect it.
I got you. I don't necessarily think that the media companies are to blame. I on some level, sympathize with them.
It's people. It's what we we want it, so they give it to us because that's how they make money.
But I also,
when they deregulated the news channels and when they made news used to be the loss leader, right? Networks always lost. They always lost money on the news because it was a public service. It was required as a public service, including children's programs and stuff like that. You remember those days?
Yeah.
When the news became a profit center, and I know there have been volumes written on this stuff. I'm probably not even remotely as qualified as most people who've written about this to talk about it. But I'm just saying, when it became a profit center, that was probably the beginning of the end.
Yeah, and Edward R. Murrow, for those of you who don't, I forget the speech that he gave. It was given in Chicago. I remember that. I know it was 1958 or 59. But he saw this coming. He knew that the sponsorships of the news programs in the 1950s were going to cause issues with content, was going to cause issues with fluff material being put in front of people because news and information became a commodity to be sold on the marketplace. And you're absolutely right. And when you're talking about news being a money loser, it was built into the economic model of these networks. They understood that their news division was going to lose this much money. It was going to cost them this much money every year to keep it, but they had to. So they made money elsewhere.
Because their license was contingent upon it.
Right.
Their license to be able to broadcast at all was contingent upon that. That was taken away.
Right.
And it became a free-for-all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did he do that speech in Good Night and Good Luck?
Part of it. But the original speech is online. It's on YouTube. You can actually hear him talk about it. I actually put together a piece. Maybe I'll throw another piece of production at the end of this one like I did last week. But I've got it.
Take it up.
Yeah. But it's worth listening to. It's actually better, I think, than the Good Night and Good Luck piece. It's hard to listen to because of the technology. It's a little rough, but it's disturbing how prescient it is. He saw this. He was a prophet. He understood where
60 years ago when he saw it happening, right?
Before cable news, before everything.
Yeah, it was still black and white television.
Yeah, he was on CBS. That was it. One channel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't take the onus off of us. I mean, I've been using that phrase, it's the people, since the beginning of this, and it is. And the only change that can come has to come from the bottom up. They're not going to. They can't. I'm not going to say they're not going to. They're not going.
People aren't going to change, right?
Well, they can't either because that's how they make money. They have got to give you what you're going to consume or they're going to cease to exist.
So this is where we are, right? As long as people are fat, dumb, and happy, they don't change.
They get worse. They change, but not for the better.
For the worse. Yeah, for the worse.
Yeah.
They get complacent.
Yeah.
And we're pretty complacent.
And you throw the dopamine addiction on top of that. You throw the validation, the psychological end of this. And we haven't even talked about Jacques Ellul in this, but I'm telling you, Brian, that book, Propaganda, all of this plays into this because of the psychological exploits that they have figured out over the course of 100 years how to take this need for self-righteousness, this need for validation, this need for a sense of purpose, all of it. It's part of the propaganda model and how people can be exploited that way. This is not separate from the propaganda material at all. It's all interwoven together. That's why the material that we're seeing throughout these echo chambers can be defined as monetized propaganda. And that's what we're feeding on each other. Agitation propaganda is a specific thing. It's a kind of propaganda. And we're using it against each other, and we're addicted to it, and they're making money on it, and it's destroying us.
Yeah. No, you're right. So what do we do?
I don't know that we can do anything. I'm not convinced it's not a triage situation here.
Right, yeah.
We have to want to change.
Stop the bleeding.
Yeah, or maybe it's like we talked about before, an addict situation where you have to hit rock bottom, or you have to drive the car into the tree and kill your kid before you understand it.
the best thing, I mean, learning propaganda, maybe that's something that would be a nice elective course in high school. Students need to learn how their minds are being manipulated.
Yes.
But I think the first step, they used to kind of teach that. At least when I was in high school, I had to take a one semester of psychology. It was required. But anyway, I think the first step for us is to unplug. We have to unplug from the matrix, and we have to unplug from the Borg, and we have to become individual human beings.
Yes, man.
And get away from all that and start living more organically. I don't know. That's just me talking off, spouting off the top of my head. But the first issue that needs to be addressed is unplugging from the matrix. We have to do it.
What are you talking? I guess I need to ask. Well, you ask me what can be done about it, and I say I don't know that anything can. Are you talking about a macro or a micro situation? Like what can be done socially, or what can we do as individuals to help ourselves? Because there are answers to the individual, socially, collectively, and realistically.
Well, you have to start with the micro to get to the macro, I think, unless you're talking policy. So policy, maybe there's a way to break these companies up, right? To where each of these companies is, of course, if we put them in competition with each other, won't they just become more efficient at manipulating us?
Yeah,
I mean that's what you do, right? You become the best at it, so you can monetize it, and then it becomes hyper social media.
Yeah, because they're going to want to trigger the dopamine trigger or the dopamine button better than the other guy across the street is triggering his dopamine button.
Yeah, so your social media just shows up on these special glasses that you buy, right? And then it's just right there all the time in front of you, which I think is already happening.
Right. If you're talking on a grand scale, what has to happen socially is, first of all, people have to understand what's happening and what's happening both within the platforms, within the technology, what's happening inside of people's minds, how it's affecting them, and what it's doing to us culturally and collectively. People have got to understand that. They've also got to understand the mechanism. First thing that needs to be probably done is these algorithms have to be made public.
Yeah.
To understand the mechanisms that are operating within these programs, within these computer banks, these rooms and rooms of mainframe computers in Menlo Park or wherever. People have to understand that.
First steps are being taken, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they have to want to understand it for one thing, but let's just assume that you have some rational actors who want to understand this. So documentaries like the social media, podcasts like this one and others probably are the first steps to really coming to understand this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But we have to be able to lay out, the 5-step plan or the 10-step plan, and this is how you do it, right? And that's, you have to start with the micro to get to the macro.
Yeah.
You make people interested, make people understand, make them at least just open their eyes and go, oh, no, wait a minute, something's wrong here.
Yeah.
And then start taking action.
Yeah.
I think because it's all economics, right? But until we start unplugging, until subscribership or readership or whatever they call it at social media, until their subscribers dramatically decrease and they start losing money, I doubt anything will be done.
Yeah, you could change. I guess you could change the economic model because this is all ad based. The attention garnering, the attention, what's the word I'm looking for? Luring people's eyeballs to the platform, time spent using, right, is all based on advertising. So I guess if you change the economic model and you went from, network television, putting eyeballs in front of, random advertisers to a subscription base, maybe you would have to pay $5 a month to have your Facebook account in exchange for getting rid of the advertising eyeballs in front of pop-ups model.
But is it all just the advertising, or isn't it also some of these things that are fed to you because it determines that you might be interested in this topic?
Well,
hey, we know you liked this page. I bet you'll like this other page.
Well, they're paid to do that. You have to pay,
and that's YouTube's model, right?
Right, but you have to pay Facebook. Like my podcast, I get hardly any exposure for my page, not the group, the page itself, because I don't pay them to boost it. I have the option to boost every single post that I put on there, and then they will
$50.
Right, yeah. And they will target people based on the data they've consumed, the things they like, the pages they visit, all of that. That's why they're gathering that information, so they can take that data and sell it to people supposedly like me who want to promote a product or a service or something. And that's the advertising model.
You're talking go to a subscriber model.
Yeah.
So maybe it's $5 a month and you don't have to see our advertising. Yep. You give us $10 a month, we'll take you out of the algorithm entirely. right?
Yeah.
Something like that, because it's the algorithm. It's not just the advertisers. It's the crazy shit that people are putting.
Let me tell you something about the algorithm. Now let's take this back. This is the grand scale we're talking about. Now let's talk about the individual. There are things you can do yourself if you want to sort of insulate yourself from all of this. The first thing is get this shit off your phone. Twitter, Facebook, all of it, and go back to, your computer. And then
just leave it on your PC.
Just leave it on the PC. Set your PC up as a desktop as well. I had to do that. I can't have my laptop sitting on the coffee table because I'll just reach over and check Facebook. I had to set it up on this desk as a desktop computer, like from 2002. And it works because I have to physically walk into this room with the purpose of getting on that computer. I can't just reach over and grab it like I can reach over and grab my phone.
It's a conscious choice, not someone else taking advantage of your unconscious.
And that's hugely important.
Yeah.
Is you're taking control of that. But as far as the algorithm goes, there are things you can do. I've still got my account open. The original one. It's got 15 people in it who never post. I unliked everything that I ever liked. That was the first thing I did. I don't click like on anything. I very rarely share anything, even to the page or to the group. Occasionally I will. Like, I like Andrew Sullivan's stuff. I will share his stuff because I want more people seeing stuff like that. I'm manipulating the algorithm for a purpose. And if I don't want people to see shit like this, you know what I do? If I still want to share the information, I take a screen grab of the link. I don't post the link. I post a picture of the link.
Oh, nice. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, then I'm not giving this horseshit organization a click, and I am not feeding the algorithm. But once you start removing all of the likes, you start purging people that just offer nothing to you other than a place in the friendship boneyard.
Yeah.
Like a zombie.
Exactly.
Let them go.
So then I gotta ask then. So what's the point if you're not feeding them information so that you can get information back from similar organizations that you like, say, for example? What's the point of even having it?
This podcast.
So
That's it.
So right. So it's a promotional tool, right? But if you're Joe on the street and you're not, if you have no likes and you have essentially no friends, what is the purpose of it, right? There's
Messenger.
no point. You might as well. Messenger's good, but you don't necessarily have to have. You have to have a Facebook account to have Messenger.
Yes, but you can deactivate your account and still use Messenger.
Ah, very nice.
You can't delete it. You can deactivate it. And then you've got a list of all these people you've ever sent a message to, which is a really good way to kind of determine if you really want to keep in touch with people. Have you sent them a message in the last 10 years?
Did you even know they were on your friends list?
Exactly. I find that incredibly useful. So I would not have this account open if I did not have the page and I did not have the group that I had to maintain. And I've gotten a handle on it. I don't get the urge to reactivate it and start ranting to random people who don't want to hear what I have to say, who have not made now you have made a conscious choice. If you have followed my page or you have joined the group that I'm in, you have explicitly said, I am interested in what you're posting, Todd. You have solicited what it is, the material that I'm putting out. Yeah. People in my friends list did not ask explicitly for my political opinions.
Would you be interested, just as a person who has a podcast and promotes a podcast, would you be interested in knowing, for example, what other podcasts or information or sources Facebook is promoting to the people who would like you?
I do know that one of the groups they associate with my page, I know this because Eric sent me a picture of it, is Real Chicks on Bikes. That's the exact reaction I had. It's like this really hot chick wearing these white shorty shorts sitting on a motorcycle, and you got a nice picture of her ass. That's What does that have to do with this podcast?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's hilarious, isn't it?
Yeah. That's crazy shit.
I don't really, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't care what happens with this show. If it were monetized, if I were, making money and I had to make a living doing this show, it may mean more to me, to be honest with you. I am more concerned about saying what it is, I think, and not worrying about how it affects the listenership and not worrying about growing the brand and making sure that my listenership is going up. I'm giving the masturbation sign here as I say this. I don't want to worry about any of that crap we had to worry about in radio. And as soon as it becomes monetized and as soon as it becomes something that needs to grow, that's the point where the material starts to be crafted toward a demographic or an audience.
Mm-hmm.
I
You're
like
talking about brand management, cash it in, right?
Exactly. And I like how it is right now. I would rather, if it grows, it's because people are resonating. It's because of the content. There's a sense of familiarity, a sense of concern, a sense of worry, and a sense of how can I change this?
Well, it's authentic. I like it that it's authentic. It's the only reason I'm here. It's because it's authentic and it's not bullshit. I don't feel like I'm performing for you or your listeners. I'm just talking.
Yeah.
And whatever comes out of my mouth, whether it makes sense to them or makes sense to you or not, I guess it doesn't make any difference to me.
Right.
I just want to, be able to communicate intelligently. And it's like we've been talking about that. We're just trying to get to the bottom of what's wrong, which I think we have, on so many levels, and try to discuss what's the solution.
Yeah.
How can we fix this?
Individually, it has to, collectively, I don't know. I don't want to, start venturing into sausage party hope territory here and saying, well, we can say that. That's the one thing about that documentary I didn't like, that it wasn't, I don't think it was clear and honest enough. And I didn't like the aspect that they thought tech was going to save us from its own tech. I don't like that. I think this has to come from us. I think it has to come from a mass awareness on an individual level of what the technology is doing to us, how it's manipulating us, the addictive natures of our own psychology. You have to be willing to see it. You have to be willing to accept it and be vulnerable to admit to yourself and to the world that, yes, you are vulnerable here. You are fallible and you can be manipulated. You've got to understand that. And then from there, then you can start taking steps. And you nailed it. I think we have to start to, as individuals, learn how to be more organic, how not to just get our interpretation of the entire world through a computer screen. Get out in it. If you're curious about something, go lay your fucking eyeballs on it.
Maybe we start the analog movement.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. No, you laugh, but I think that's it. I think that you have got to stop relying upon someone else's interpretation of the world. Mine, theirs, some guy you like because he preaches at your congregational ideological church. See things for yourself and think for yourself.
That's it. And we have to get back to nature, get back to roots, get back to our organic way of maneuvering through the world. And especially when these tools have become, these would be great tools if they hadn't weaponized them.
Yeah.
It would be a great tool to be able to use to get some kind of news from, organizations that you belong to. Great way to keep it legitimately in touch with legitimate friends that you want to keep in touch with.
Yeah.
But once they monetized it and weaponized it, it just became something that is not healthy, clearly, emotionally, psychologically and physically. In many ways, for a lot of people, it's just not healthy. Get outside, go for a fucking walk, and meet people. Instead
of sending a like or a happy birthday message on Facebook,
liking somebody else's happy birthday message because it's the least you can do.
Literally, the least you could. Go have lunch with the person. Go have a happy meal at McDonald's just for old time's sake. Or
if you're actually friends, just pick up the fucking phone and call them.
And don't text them first. And don't text them to say, hey, is this a good time to just fucking call? It's okay. You can do it. I hate that. I don't hate it. I know everybody does. I shouldn't say I hate that. But I don't
want to talk to you, I won't pick up the phone.
Exactly.
Just like the old days.
Exactly. I can still screen my calls. I don't need it. But Chris and I had
sound like a couple of old
Chris and I had a funny conversation about this the other day because he always does this. I don't know if it might surprise some of you, but a conversation with Todd can be exhausting. So Chris has this thing where he needs to kind of plan part of the day around calling me. You know what I mean? And it's just like, okay. And then I think he has to motivate himself and he has to make sure he's rested and perhaps take a vitamin beforehand. But he always texts, is this a good time? And it's just like, dude, just call. It's okay. Yeah. You can just call. Surprise me.
Call.
Yeah. The phone ringing unexpectedly is not going to give me a heart attack. I can handle it. I think I can manage the stress. And so he did for a little while. And it was fun. It was neat. I'd be sitting here reading a book and the phone would ring out of the blue like, oh, hey.
Hey, a phone call.
Yeah, and we'd have a nice little chat. Then he stopped.
I do like texting. It has its utility, and it's always nice for quick hits of sharing information. But if you want to connect with someone on a human level,
right.
you got to talk to them. You got to hear their voice. You got to hear the inflection.
Yeah,
and it's even better to see them. You know?
Yeah. I'm not talking.
I don't find talking. I've never found talking to you exhausting. I just think it's just the conversation. But you and I are sort of like-minded in that regard, right?
Yeah, right. I don't find conversations with you or Chris exhausting. I find them relatively exhilarating because most people I can't have these conversations with very many people. I get this look. I know the look. It's like they're trying to, pretend they're interested. They're trying to give the courtesy of feigning comprehension and interest in what I'm saying, but they can't because the doe-eyed look's like, huh? I know that look.
Yep.
It's like, okay, I'm sorry. How's your day? How's work? You have a cat.
Yeah. Let's talk about our pet.
Yeah. One thing I want to get to, we're right around an hour now. So the one thing I wanted to return to, though, is that you're absolutely right about what you were talking about, in my opinion anyway, about how early on this tool, this connecting tool had its positive utilities. And when used as such, as a means to connect with people, as a means to keep meaningful relationships active, and the ease of doing that is fantastic. I met half of my family that I had never met in my life. I met them right around the age of 40 simply by using it. That's how I met them. It was one of those things that could have been a news story 10 years ago. Facebook reunited these people. He saw his father for the second time in his whole life. That kind of thing. But the flip side of it became something else. And Facebook helped destroy some of those relationships that Facebook helped find.
Exactly, yes. And sometimes when you find those folks, they just end up being kind of a disappointment anyway, right? So,
sometimes, yeah. But they weren't. With these guys, they weren't. The relationships were really, really good for about a year and a half. But then Facebook took over. It turned into something else.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, since we maintained the relationship on Facebook, we lived in 3 different states, thousands of miles apart. We couldn't maintain it organically. We could call and all that, but we don't have that foundation of 30 years as siblings.
I had a similar experience, and thankfully through Facebook, where we were able to connect, and then this was almost 11 years ago, and now we're extremely close, and with a whole wing of my family that I didn't even really know or have any association with, and when you take something like this that's powerful like Facebook and combine it with something powerful like Ancestry.com, it's just like, man, you've just got this whole field of connections that you didn't know you had and family that you didn't know you had.
Yeah.
But I guess the question becomes then, are you any more enriched because of having these family members than you were at the time? I suppose it's different for each person.
Yeah.
Was it worth it?
I wouldn't do it again. And I say that half-heartedly because me personally, without going into the whole backstory of it all, I had dealt with that part of my life not being there. By the time I was 34 or 35, I had dealt with it. I had compartmentalized it, and I had moved on, and I knew who I was and what I was, at least at that point in my life.
What you're standing,
Yeah. And when that scab was reopened, it sort of regressed me back to being like 15 years old.
Right.
Like, there they are. Woo! Yes, this is great. And they're gone.
Yeah.
Now they're gone.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck. You know what I mean?
It's a two-edged sword because, I met, this is how I ran into my brother who I never knew. And so we're extremely close now. It's been a wonderful relationship. But there's always that little in the back of my mind. There's always that regret, all those years that we've missed with each other. You know what I mean? I'm his big brother, and I never really got to be that because he's in his 40s now. He doesn't really need a big brother.
Well, but it's nice to have one, though. That's
nice to have one. Yeah. So we look back and we go, man, that's we really missed. So there's always just that little bit of sort of melancholy about it. But it's been a great relationship. It's terrific. But and honestly, that was because I used social media to find him. So, but that was also 10, 11 years ago.
Yes, it was different then, wasn't it?
it was different. It wasn't as monetized. I don't remember exactly, but I don't remember seeing ads constantly, and I also don't remember seeing off the wall, fringe news organizations and stuff like that on there either. So it just seemed like a place where friends gathered at the time, and then it morphed in front of us slowly into something that we're not equipped to handle.
The change, I think, was the news feed. That wasn't there, if you remember, early on. I think you had to go to people's page to actually see what they posted. I don't think that it always had that feed that you would get on that homepage.
You could post to so-and-so's page? Remember that kind of thing?
You could do that, yeah. And then the algorithm came along, and instead of seeing everything that everybody in your friends list had posted chronologically, they changed the algorithm came in and started picking and choosing what it was going to show you. Yeah, that, I think, was the beginning. Because people
you
could
didn't
figure
get all of it. You got the information that it decided you could have.
Right, based on your information and how people manipulated what they were posting. I think so. And there's one other aspect to this too. One other positive aspect to this and I kind of have evolved on this over the last couple of months because I was really ready to get rid of this. And even despite doing the podcast, I mean, I'm not getting a lot of value out of Facebook of this podcast anyway. And I sure as fuck, I'm not getting much out of Twitter either. Really, the podcast isn't that big. But the one utility that I still get out of this is the conversations that I have with a very select group of people. I have to maintain it. I have to put the fence around the barnyard to keep the wolves out. But the people who have made it on the inside, I value what they have to say a great deal. And it helps me to have these conversations, to write things out and post things, have people comment back to me. Show me something I've missed. Send me in another direction on this material. Now, it has to be centered. I have to control the narrative because I don't want to get pushed into somebody else's stuff. But
you've learned how to use it as a tool, and you're keeping the tool sharp and taking care of it. Yeah.
But as far as people goes and the relationships goes, that aspect of having a targeted group of people to contribute to the conversation rationally is still invaluable.
Yeah.
I can't go see Matt in Sacramento. I can't go see Eric in L.A. I think he's in L.A. I can't, go see these other people. I forget where the rest of them are at. But we can't sit down and have coffee at Starbucks. We can't make a play date on Saturday at 3 o'clock or Sunday at 2 o'clock, where we sit down and spend however long talking about this stuff. And so I've met some my girlfriend's cousin is one of these people. He's down in Georgia. He has added some incredible stuff to that group, stuff that I hadn't thought of. So how do you balance that? How do you maintain that? The best I can figure out is just call the herd, put the gate up. I'll be the gatekeeper for this group, but still try to maintain that input. Because without it...
Is there another option?
No.
Are there other options for you to meet and exchange information?
No,
right?
Email, but then it's not a group dynamic where somebody else is going to be able to add something to it.
That's right.
In that sense, it's still useful.
Well, you're getting use out of it, and I'm not, and so I've unplugged from the matrix, and I'm feeling really good about it.
Yeah, I really would like to hear how that goes for the next couple of weeks. I remember,
I'll keep you posted each week. Yeah, I feel great now.
I remember a week, 2 weeks, I was okay, and then after a while, it got a little difficult.
You start feeling the pull.
Yeah, isolate.
Like, I haven't talked to so and so. I haven't seen so and so's feed in so long. I need to see what they're having to say. And then you log in and look at it, and it's nothing. It's the same old shit they've been posting for 10 years.
You remember why you got away.
Yeah, right. It's kind of like you and I got out of radio, right? It's like the guys that get out of radio and leave the radio business. Yeah. They go back and do weekend shows to remind them why they got out of radio.
Yeah. Oh, man.
It's like, this sucks.
Flip the radio on and listen to it these days.
Oof. Just listen to any channel, and then you'll be like, yeah, it's still the same old uncreative nonsense.
Yeah, if you do get the urge to log on, think of like one or two people, like an extreme conservative friend and an extreme liberal friend, and just go stalk their page. Don't let them know you're there. Just go read what they've posted over the last few days, and that should take care of any qualms, any withdrawal symptoms you're having at that moment. It's like getting sick on Southern Comfort and then smelling it again.
So far, I've had no withdrawals. I think the first couple of days I had a little, I think I was missing the a little bit of the dopamine hit that you get from it, from validation of being liked and stuff like that. But I prefer being liked by actual human beings, in front of me who tell me that they like me and not just push a thumbs up. But there are moments when I'm just kind of watching TV mindlessly and I want to reach for the phone and just start scrolling through. But then I just find something else to do.
It's kind of like quitting smoking, isn't it? It's like quitting smoking. When you would quit, you'd like have the urge to reach over and grab your cigarette pack.
I think that's a valid point. I think not only does it, because there's a hormonal change because of the dopamine, maybe even oxytocin if you're feeling loved, but I think there's a tactile experience that you miss too from sitting there with your phone and kind of scrolling with your thumb. And you know what I mean? Yeah. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah. The colors, the lights. There have been studies on this, that the colors and the sounds when you hit something that does something psychologically, it's like a slot machine. It's the same idea that you see in casinos with the flashing lights and the colors and all that stuff. They design that shit that way.
Oh, sure. I just had a conversation with one of the psychiatrist friends that I have, and he was talking about casinos are masterful, I want to say, monuments to operant conditioning, a human classical and classical conditioning. Like, for example, the reason you go into any casino, the carpet is busy and ugly. You don't want to look at it. Why? Because they want to keep your eyes up. They want you looking at the slot machines. That's exactly why it's like that.
Yeah.
I mean, all that kind of stuff. And then when you start to walk into the room, you hear the din of noise. All those machines added together make one single noise. I think probably you know that sound.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and it's all so rewarding. You're just like, oh, let me add it. Oh my God,
it's hypnotizing.
Yeah,
it really is. And then you hear this dinging, this bell going off, and it's the thought of like someone won over there. I'm going to walk that way. It's like
it's mesmerizing.
Yeah, I had an interesting chat with Chris yesterday. It was mostly political, so I won't go into a lot of that. But I think the crux of it was, and it boiled down to, I guess maybe as the final point for today, is that you have to understand what he was just talking about. Was Brian was just talking about how all of this stuff is designed to manipulate and target some part of your psychology in a general direction. They want a conditioned response from you. And it is designed, it's engineered that way. You have got to, please, dear listener, please, dear Toddzillaphile, I love you. You have got to embrace the cynical and skeptical side. You have got to start assuming, I think, in my opinion, that a lot of the things that we're seeing with social media, the targeted media, the demographic targeting, this warfare media is targeted to elicit a very, very specific response from you. And if you can figure out where it's coming from, the source, you can also figure out the targeted response they want from you. You've got to start thinking that way. You can't it's a coincidence. Just the way. No, it's not.
No. It's not, and it's not difficult either. The idea of training, conditioning animals in general, and human beings particularly, is not difficult. Anyone who's taken an undergrad level psychology class can tell you all about it. This is easy stuff, and it's a big, big business, and it's happening to you everywhere you go. There's a reason that the Coke can is red. There's a reason that there's, the colors in the grocery store are the way they are.
Yeah.
The music is the way it is. The temperature is what it is. There's a reason for everything. The people behind the curtain are psychologists designing it. I'm not demonizing psychologists. They're doing their job. We know the key. We have the keys to the kingdom, and we know how to do it. And it's not difficult. It's not hard.
Right. It's weaponizing psychology. It's the same as really weaponizing the tool of Facebook. Facebook was a tool 15 years ago. Psychology is a tool as well, but you can weaponize tools. You can have a nuclear power plant. You can have the A-bomb.
Yep.
Yeah, you got to understand that and really take that cynical attitude. I hate to say that, but you do. Mm-hmm. These days you do. It's too late now. We've moved beyond. We've moved from this innocent adolescent phase where we can just kind of go along with things. We have to start thinking like adults with our technology and with the information we consume and how we share it as well. And the responsibility we have in making sure that we're not just sharing bullshit. I'm going to get back. I'm going to get. I'm going to get back to the. I mentioned in the group last week, and I may have at the end of the podcast, but I went back and listened to my old agitation propaganda material from about a year ago, pretty much taken from this book by Jacques Ellul, and I've noticed that the stuff has become more apt now than it was last August as we move towards the election and as we sort of a lot of the things that you and I are talking about as far as this targeted manipulation of psychology and trying to get people to behave and react a certain way. So I think what I'm going to do in the next week or two is start to edit those things down, and they need it, and start posting them here. And hopefully,
lots of greatest hits. Yeah,
I don't know how much time you have, Brian, but if you have an opportunity to listen to any of that stuff, I would really like your feedback on some of it. I'd love to hear what you have to think about it.
Yeah, shoot me the show numbers and I'll check them out.
I'm going to send you the edited ones because I know how you love it when I rant. So I'm going to try to take some of the ranting out of it. But I'd really love to hear how you view that stuff, and the rest of you too. I think you'll see the connection quite clearly once they're up.
Great.
Good show, Brian. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.
It is much easier to use this money-making machine of television and radio merely as a conduit. If radio news is to be regarded as a commodity, only acceptable when saleable, then I don't care what you call it. I say it isn't news. One of the basic troubles with radio and television news is that both instruments have grown up as an incompatible combination of show business, advertising, and news. And when you get all three under one roof, the dust never settles. Sometimes there is a clash between the public interest and the corporate interest. Upon occasion, economics and editorial judgment are in conflict. I am frightened by the imbalance, the constant striving to reach the largest possible audience for everything, by the absence of a sustained study of the state of the nation. It can be done. Maybe it won't be, but it could. But let us not shoot the wrong piano player. Do not be deluded into believing that the titular heads of the networks control what appears on their network. They all have better taste. All are responsible to stockholders. And in my experience, all are honorable men. But they must schedule what they can sell in the public market. And this brings us to the nub of the question. In one sense, it rather revolves around the phrase heard frequently along Madison Avenue, the corporate image. I am not precisely sure what this phrase means, but I would imagine that it reflects a desire on the part of the corporations who pay the rate for radio and television programs to use that time exclusively for the sale of goods and services. Is it in their own interest and that of the stockholders so to do? The sponsor of an hour's television program is not merely buying the 6 minutes devoted to his commercial message. He is determining within broad limits the sum total of the impact of the entire hour. If he always, invariably, reaches for the largest possible audience, then this process of insulation, of escape from reality, will continue to be massively financed, and its apologists will continue to make winsome speeches about giving the public what it wants or letting the public decide. We're engaged in a great experiment to discover whether a free public opinion can devise and direct methods of managing the affairs of the nation. We may fail, but in terms of information, we are handicapping ourselves needlessly. For if the premise upon which our pluralistic society rests, which as I understand it, is that if the people are given sufficient undiluted information, they will then somehow, even after long, sober second thoughts, reach the right conclusion. If that premise is wrong, then not only the corporate image, but the corporations and the rest of us are done for. To a very considerable extent, the media of mass communications in a given country reflects the political, economic, and social climate in which it grows and flourishes. We are currently wealthy, fat, comfortable, and complacent. We have currently a built-in allergy to unpleasant or disturbing information, and our mass media reflect this. But unless we get up off our fat surpluses and recognize that television, in the main, is being used to distract, delude, amuse, and insulate us, then television and those who finance it, those who look at it, and those who work at it may see a totally different picture too late. I do not advocate that we turn television into a 27-inch wailing wall where long hairs constantly moan about the state of our culture and our defense. But I would just like to see it reflect occasionally the hard, unyielding realities of the world in which we live. And I would like to see the doing of it redound to the credit of those who finance and program it. Measure the results by Nielsen, Crendex, or Silex, it doesn't matter. The main thing is to try. The responsibility can be easily placed, in spite of all the mouthings about giving the public what it wants. It rests on big business and on big television, and it rests on the top. I began by saying that our history will be what we make it. If we go on as we are, then history will take its revenge, and retribution will not limp in catching up with us. We are to a large extent an imitative society. If one or two or three corporations would undertake to devote just a small fraction of their advertising appropriation along the lines that I have suggested, the procedure might well grow by contagion. The economic burden would be bearable, and there might ensue a most exciting adventure. Exposure to ideas and the bringing of reality into the homes of the nation. To those who say people wouldn't look, they wouldn't be interested, they're too complacent, indifferent, and insulated, I can only reply, there is in one reporter's opinion considerable evidence against that contention. But even if they are right, what have they got to lose? Because if they are right, and this instrument is good for nothing but to entertain, amuse, and insulate, then the tube is flickering now, and we will soon see that the whole struggle is lost. This instrument can teach, it can illuminate, yes, and even it can inspire. But it can do so only to the extent that humans are determined to use it to those ends. Otherwise, it's nothing but wires and lights in a box. There is a great and perhaps decisive battle to be fought against ignorance, intolerance, and indifference. This weapon of television could be useful. Stonewall Jackson, who is generally believed to have known something about weapons, is reported to have said, "When war comes, you must draw the sword and throw away the scabbard." The trouble with television is that it is rusting in the scabbard during a battle for survival.
That speech was given on October 15th of 1958. What is that, 62 years ago? And Murrow gave that, he went up, and you talk about speaking truths to power. Now, he was an established broadcaster. He was already a legend. His war broadcasts in World War II, he was an icon, a broadcasting icon at this point. So he had the status where he could go in front of the powers that be, all of these high-powered radio executives, and give that kind of speech. But he did it. He did it in front of the, it's an organization called the RTDNA. I think they're actually still around these days. But that's the famous speech that was used in Good Night and Good Luck. It's an edited version of that. Now, you can get the full version on YouTube. I think there's recordings still over there, and you can also get the text of the entire speech as well. at the rtdna.org website. I played a piece last week as well, the Howard Beale piece from Network, ranting about the power of the tube. This goddamn tube can make presidents and blah, blah, blah. I need to impress upon you that the things that I'm posting, this piece and that piece, when they're talking about the tube, 40 to 60 years ago, we are experiencing this same crisis with the internet and social media in particular. How these things are affecting us, what they are going to do to us, what the technology that was new in 1958 was television, relatively new, about the same age as the internet now, give or take, maybe a little younger at that point. So they were struggling to figure out how this was affecting us, how it was changing us, what the dangers of television would prove to be. That man right there, Edward R. Murrow, was almost a literal prophet. He saw things coming. He saw the effects that mass media in general, television in particular, but mass media in general, the effects that they would have. The Howard Beale character in Network, I think 1976 or 1977, he saw it as well. The influence, the next progression, the next step in the process of turning news into a commodity, and how that would affect the on-air product, how that would affect the ability of the American public to even pretend to be on the path toward an enlightened citizenry. We are having the same discussion now, and thank God. Thank God it's finally happening. I'm sensing it more and more each and every day. More people are writing about it. More people are talking about it. Thank God, finally. I don't feel like I'm alone on an island, albeit with Marianne. That would be pretty cool. This is the contemporary challenge. More so, I think, than climate change. I really do. What happens with climate change won't matter if we don't get a handle on our information, our inability to perceive reality as it is, and what that is doing to us, these competing mobs, these competing reality mobs, who are just getting angrier and angrier and angrier, and are going to be on the verge of wanting to kill each other soon enough. Indications of that happening already. I have not mentioned in this podcast Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We intended to. That was the one topic we assumed we were going to talk about. But the angle we were going to take on that was not necessarily the political dynamics and the strategy and all that, but no, how that event, how the loss of this Supreme Court justice less than 50 days before this coming shit show of an election, how that was going to affect the echo chambers, the narratives, and the storytelling, the post hoc horseshit that's sure to come. It's already begun. The hypocrisy, the naked hypocrisy and the post hoc reasoning that's being deployed to explain it away on both sides. I'm sorry, on both sides. Yes, on both sides. If you believe that Barack Obama deserved to have his Supreme Court nominee voted upon 4 years ago, you're acting out of revenge if you violated the same principle with Trump. And yes, you're right. The hypocrisy from the Republicans is astounding. No one has principle left. It's all win. It's all revenge. And this sort of attitude is creeping into the general public, the population, into these echo chambers. The congregational priests and proselytes and ministers are preaching this sermon every single week. We are on the side of righteousness against that evil. That was where we were going to take the Ruth Bader Ginsburg conversation, I think. That's how my impression of it. I won't speak for what Brian has to say about it. We never got to it. Maybe we will next week. This is the problem. This is the crisis that we're enduring. We're just on the cusp of, I'm afraid. And the conversation that we need to have about this technology and what it is doing to us is down the line of the same one that Edward R. Murrow was talking about in 1958, that Marshall McLuhan was talking about in that era as well, but it has to go deeper because this technology affects, triggers, provokes us on a deeper level than even television did, and that makes the propaganda delivery system that much more effective because it's always there. You can constantly be pinged with propaganda 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, depending upon who you are following and what the settings of the device sitting in your pocket, how open you have left the cognitive firewall, the door to manipulation of your psyche. This is the conversation that must be had, and it must begin now, and thank God I'm seeing some indications that that's happening. Finally. I'm not convinced it's enough, and I am not convinced that enough people are having this chat. I'm not convinced enough of you are listening to the conversation that's happening around you. And woe is us. I told Brian I'm afraid we're in a triage situation. I've used that phrase, that expression several times on the show, and I think we are. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are solutions. Maybe there's a mass awakening coming. I don't think so. Maybe. We'll see. But we're going to get a really good barometer reading here in about 5 weeks. Thanks again for Brian for sending in. To Brian for sending in. A lot of talking today. He'll be back next week. Really enjoying these chats with him. Thanks again for joining up with the show, Brian. EscapingTheCave.com is the website. You can also check me out at Twitter if you want. Don't get your expectations too high. At ETC Pod Facebook, have a Facebook group as well. You're welcome to lurk. Follow along if you like. And the propaganda series will resume at some point very, very soon. Promise. Thanks for clicking it. We'll talk to you next time. So long.